Hello, my name is Corentin. I'm a PhD candidate working on designing and exploring a dynamic biophysical model to quantify the resilience of European farming systems to decreases in input imports. I'm hosted at INAE in the SADAPT lab. I'm funded by Ceylon Convergence Institute and Shore Farm Project. Ceylon is about land-based strategies for climate change mitigation, and Shore Farm is about resilience of farming systems. So I had the honor of merging these two stimulating topics for developing my research. My PhD is supervised by François Léger, Francesco Acatino, and Sophie Martin. I started the PhD in September 2019 and will finish by the end of 2021. I will first present what I do in the Ceylon Convergence Institute and give some element of context of my PhD subject. I will then list some research questions on my PhD and give elements of methods. I will then present some results of my PhD and speak about work perspectives. As I mentioned, my PhD is co-funded by Ceylon Convergence Institute. I'm part of the challenge number 2, Agriculture and Forestry under Climate Change, and especially of the research line Optimizing Food Production Systems under Climate and Environmental Pressure. The main aim of my PhD thesis is to quantify and explore food production resilience of European farming systems to input-import decline due to global pig oil production. Input-import decline is the environmental pressure I considered. I combine two types of approaches in my PhD. First, a time dynamic and static biophysical modeling. Second, a spatial analysis of modeled and collected data. Since World War II, European agriculture is dependent on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer and more recently on feed imports. As 1 kilogram of gas is necessary to synthesize 1 kilogram of synthetic nitrogen, synthesization of nitrogen is responsible for 1 to 2% of the total quantity of fossil fuel consumed annually globally. However, the International Energy Agency, in its World Energy Outlook 2018, suggested that peak oil supply could be reached by 2025 without an increase of tight oil production capacity of the USA. This assessment was done before the coronavirus crisis that led to decreases in production as well as investment in the US tight oil industry. A global peak oil supply would certainly lead to an increase in input prices, as agricultural inputs prices are correlated to oil prices. It could also lead to a decrease in production and therefore in the availability of input imports. Consequently, farmers' capacity to purchase and use inputs will be certainly decreased. The main research question of the PhD is how resilient are European farming systems to declines in input imports. By resilience, we mean the capacity of a farming system to absorb a shock or a gradual disturbance while maintaining food production. The PhD has also several sub-research questions. For instance, how robust are European farming systems to declines in input imports? By robustness, we mean the resilience without configurational changes. Then, which configurational changes decrease the dependence on imported inputs? And which configurational changes increase the resilience of food production to decreases in inputs imports? And finally, what is the relationship between food production and resilience and greenhouse gas emission reductions according to configurational changes? Why did we choose a modeling approach for this PhD? First, the resilience is a dynamic and complex concept. Second, it is mainly qualified or quantified based on historical data and observed phenomena. As the main aim of the PhD is to quantify food production resilience of European farming systems to input-import decline, modeling is relevant for that purpose as it allows to simulate unobserved phenomena and to overcome lack of data. And biophysical modeling is adapted to estimate food production resilience. The design model is a time-dynamic nitrogen mass flow balance at farming system scale. The time step is the year, and we define a farming system as a population of individual farms in interaction located over a common geographical region that have broadly similar resource bases, enterprise patterns, household livelihoods, and constraints. In the model, the farming system is composed of two land uses, cropland and permanent grassland. Each land use is composed of a plant compartment, crops or graze grasses, and of a soil compartment. Each soil compartment is composed of an organic pool and a mineral pool of nitrogen. There is also a livestock compartment composed of different species. Livestock is either grazing grass or eating crops. Each compartment exchanges nitrogen flow with others, either only mineral nitrogen or only organic nitrogen, or both together. Losses of nitrogen occur during effluent management, but also during soil management. Air is also depositing nitrogen on the soil, and leguminous crops are also able to fix nitrogen from the air. Then humans also import nitrogen flows, either synthetic nitrogen fertilizer to the mineral pool or feed to livestock to complement the local feed production. We model two other interactions between compartments. Between soil and plant compartment, we model the plant yield as a linear function with the available mineral nitrogen in the soil. The yield is saturating when reaching a certain maximum yield. And between plant and livestock compartment, we model the livestock number as a function of feed availability. In case of feed shortage, that is a local feed availability lower than the feed need, the livestock number is decreased. The simulated challenges are a decline in feed and synthetic fertilizer import availability. We simulated a linear decrease from 100% of the initial feed needs or mineral nitrogen needs to 0 over 30 years. So now, how did we measure food production resilience? We measure food production resilience using three metrics. First, the higher the resilience, the longer the time period without decrease. The higher the resilience, the higher the final value at the end of the simulation. And finally, the higher the resilience, the lower the cumulative food production loss. So now let's have an overview on the plan of analysis conducted in this PhD. Regarding modeling, we combine static and dynamic modeling. For dynamic modeling, the challenges were only fertilizer and feed import declines, as we have seen before. We combine different modes of analysis, a scenario and viability modes for dynamic modeling. Viability allowed to identify trajectories and not only have forced trajectories. And static modeling was optimization algorithm. Regarding objectives, we had food production or food production and climate change mitigation for dynamic modeling. Or in optimization, we try to maximize crop and animal source food production while minimizing fertilizer and feed imports. Analyses were conducted at the scale of the small agricultural region or at the NUTS2 scale for the objective of food production and climate change mitigation. And regarding level, it was either at the level of 3 small agricultural regions or at the French level when it was at the small agricultural region scale. And when it was at the NUTS2 scale, it was at the level of the region Alentejo in Portugal. Regarding changing variables, that is configurational changes, first we didn't consider any changes to look at robustness. And then we considered crop area shares and herd size and composition changes. For viability, we considered only crop area shares. And for the analysis in Portugal, we considered herd size, permanent pastures composition, and cattle diet changes. Finally, we plan to conduct a spatial analysis to look at hotspots of ecosystem services and food production robustness at the scale of a small agricultural region and at the French level. I'm going to show you some results today. First, the robustness of food production at the level of 3 small agricultural regions, but also at the French level. And then I'm going to show you some results of the optimization at the level of 3 small agricultural regions. Right now, the viability is, the analysis is ongoing, while we plan to analyze dynamically scenarios for the 3 small agricultural regions, but also to conduct the optimization at the French level, and as mentioned, also to do this spatial analysis at the French level. All these perspectives are depending on results I'm going to show. The 3 small agricultural regions used in this analysis were selected from Jouvent et al. Classification. The Plateau Picard in green is a fig crop farming system with a high share of cereal and with a very low stocking rate. The Bretagne Centrale in blue is an intensive monogastric farming system with a high shares in cereal and fodder cultivated, and with a high stocking rate composed mainly of pigs and poultry. Then the Bocage Bourbonnais in red is an extensive ruminant farming system with a high share of grass and fodder cultivated, and with an average stocking rate composed only of cattle. Before presenting the results, I would like just to introduce the viability theory. This is a theoretical mathematical framework to study regulation of dynamic systems under constraint. It allows to identify a set of initial states from which there is at least one trajectory of state and control variables, verifying the constraint to infinity. On the graphic below, the initial state of the orange curve is viable as the trajectory remains in the state of constraints a long time, whereas the initial state of the red curve is not viable because the trajectory goes out of the set of constraints. Applied to my model, the viability allows to identify trajectories of crop area shares changes that are viable, but also the entire set of initial state that are viable and that satisfy a certain level of food production. Let's have a look now to the robustness of the 3 small agricultural regions. The results of the total food production robustness of the 3 small agricultural regions are as follows. We can see that on the long term, the decrease of the total food production is at maximum minus 55% in the feed crop farming system and about minus 45% for the 2 crop livestock farming system. We can see that on the short and long term, the extensive ruminants is the most robust. On the short term, the feed crop farming system is more robust than the intensive monogastric, but on the long term, it's the contrary. Other conclusion we can have from these results is that the farming system, the least productive, that is extensive ruminants, is the most robust in the short and long term. We also analyzed that permanent pastures enhance robustness as they require less nitrogen synthetic fertilizer than cropland. Livestock effluents also reduce synthetic fertilizer needs. And finally, the period of time without food production decline, that we qualify as robustness window, could enable adaptation actions to face the disturbances, that is, the configurational changes. I will now show you the results of the robustness at the French level. So we run the model without configurational changes for all the small agricultural regions in France, especially to identify proxies of robustness. We clustered the small agricultural regions based on the robustness window length, total food production at year 30, the monogastric stocking rates, and also the ruminant stocking rate. We found an optimum cluster number of 8. So for example, now if we look at two clusters with low robustness, R1 and R3, we see first for R1 that there is a low robustness window length, but 50% of total food production at year 30. This could be explained by a high stocking rate, which implies high feed import needs, and also there is a high reliance on synthetic fertilizer needs, that is a high plant productivity. Bretagne Centrale is part of it. Regarding the cluster number 3, the robustness window is higher, but there is a lower total food production at year 30. The stocking rates for both monogastric and ruminants is very low, so there is a low feed import need, but there is a very high reliance on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Plateau Picard is part of this cluster. If we focus on the cluster R1 and look more into detail regarding feed self-sufficiency per feed category, that is the ratio between the local feed production and the feed needs, we see that there is enough concentrates and forages for this small agricultural region, but without any significant surplus. And regarding protein concentrates, small agricultural regions of this cluster are not at all self-sufficient. Between 80% and 100% of protein concentrates are imported. However, there might be neighbor small agricultural regions that could export their protein concentrate surplus in the small agricultural region of this cluster. But we can see that it's not enough. This makes sense as protein concentrates are imported in this small agricultural region from countries like Brazil. Thus, to increase robustness of the small agriculture and of the cluster, it seems necessary to increase protein concentrates production or to decrease the needs in protein concentrates in this region. Finally, let's have a look to the results for the 3 small agricultural regions of optimization. The optimization for the 3 small agricultural regions consisted in maximizing animal source food production and crop source food production while minimizing feed import and synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. We allowed from the initial state for the 3 small agricultural regions variation of herd size and composition and also crop area shares. The graphic on the left shows the results of the optimization for the Pareto frontier with the objectives crop source food production and animal source food production. We can see that the algorithms tend to find for the field crops farming system solution with decreasing crop source food production but increasing animal source food production. For the intensive monogastric farming system, the algorithm tend to find solution with increase in animal source food production without change in crop source food production. And finally, for the extensive ruminant, the algorithm tends to find solution in either that increase crop and animal source food production at the same times, or only one of the 2 other objectives without decreasing the other. However, the point of the Pareto frontier that interests us the most are the configuration with feed import and synthetic nitrogen fertilizer minimization in light purple on the right graphics. For these points, if we look at the herd size and composition variations, we can see for the extensive ruminant farming system that there is in majority an increase in the pigs and poultry number, while in the majority a decrease in the cattle number. On the contrary, for the intensive monogastric farming system, there is an increase in the cattle number and in majority a decrease of the pigs and poultry number. Regarding change in crop area shares, we can see that for the extensive ruminant, there is in the majority a decrease in soft wheat and dry legumes, and the same regarding soft wheat for the intensive monogastric, while there is a clear increase in vegetables, fruits and nuts in the intensive monogastric. Regarding crops and grasses allocated to livestock, the non-fertilized crops and grasses are increasing in extensive ruminants in intensive monogastric, especially high productive natural grasslands. However, the trend is not as clear for the concentrates that are not fertilized. And regarding fertilized crops allocated to livestock, clearly maize, so grain maize and maize fodder are in the majority decreasing. And finally, regarding food productivity in absolute or relative terms, we can see that there is clearly in majority a decrease of the productivity for the intensive monogastrics. However, for the extensive ruminants, the median is close to the initial value. To conclude on these results, first, it's clear that in France, food production robustness to feed and synthetic nitrogen fertilizer decline is not maximal in terms of robustness window, but also final food production value. Thus, configurational changes, that is plant area shares and herd size and composition changes, are required to enhance resilience. However, these changes would imply to reduce feed and synthetic nitrogen fertilizer import while maintaining the level of production, and they vary according to the farming system. But it's clear that livestock and legumes would play a key role in the resilience of food production, provided that they are coupled with the local natural capital. The research conducted during this PhD generated many work perspectives. First, we could make the challenges considered more complex by considering climate change impact, for instance. Second, we could complete the model and the objectives, adding the monthly time step to take into account polyculture, adding the phosphorus cycle, or develop a nutritional approach for objectives. Third, we could obtain the results at national and European level and still at the scale of the farming system. Fourth, we could hierarchize the contribution of configurational changes to resilience according to the type of farming system and the objectives. And finally, we could transform the model and modeling tools into a decision support tool, for example, by integrating them into a web-based software. Thank you for your attention. Please feel free to contact me by email if you have any questions.